Warrior Dai Grepher was a dragon manipulating warrior who would end up either a powerful sword master or would let himself be overcome by darkness. Ever since Dai Grepher was a child, the sword was a part of him. He had the utmost confidence in his swordsmanship. Slaying pesky enemies with ease, he was a master of his craft. His arch enemy would be another warrior he met on the battlefield. He refused to go easy on her just because she was a lady. However, an unexpected force would send their weapons flying out of their hands. This unexpected force would drag Lady of the Wasteland to a different dimension, where she would train and become the mighty DD warrior lady. She would return to her dimension and face off against Dai Grepher. Dai Grepher would use some interesting tactics in order to distract his enemy, and although he had her on the brink, she would open up a portal to another dimension and send him right through it. In this dimension, Dai Grepher's skills as a warrior would be tested. He would form a team of other warriors and spellcasters, and together they would fight in order to help Dai Grepher back to his own dimension. Being caught off guard by an enemy group of spellcasters, they would summon monsters to attack, but Dai Grepher's allies would be there to save him. Ready for his rematch against DD Warrior Lady, the spellcasters would attempt to send Dai Grepher back to his home. Dai Grepher would be transported into a forest. Unaware if he's home or not, he would begin to wander and would come across a split path. This is where Dai Grepher's fate would branch off into multiple timelines. Now this is where the story gets a little complicated, so if you have a different interpretation of how the story unfolds, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you guys think. The paths would branch off into two different ways, a light hero path essentially, and a dark evil path. Going down the light path, Dai Grepher would meet Spirit Ryu, and with Ryu's powers, the two would fuse and become Ryu Senshi. In another timeline, Grepher would come across a chamber filled with weapons beyond his imagination. These weapons would include some twin swords, a butterfly dagger, a gravity axe, a rod of silence, a shooting star bow, and a wicked breaking flamberge. Each weapon would contain its own guardian protecting the weapons. In one of these timelines, Grepher would try and take the twin swords, being a masterclass swordsman himself. The guardian Trice would see the potential in Grepher and allow him to wield the blades. Grepher and his new weapons would try once again to make it back home, coming across a very familiar and evil looking face in the process, but luckily for him, he makes it back home safe and sound. In another timeline, Grepher would try and wield the axe, but the guardian known as Guardian Grawl oh, that's hard. Didn't think Grepher was worthy enough since he was a sword wielder, so he would punish him. Grepher would try to crawl his way back onto the path, seeing silhouettes of what would await for him. Another path would see Dai Grepher coming face to face with an evil version of himself, known as Dark Grepher. The two would battle until a monster from the woods would appear and attack both of them. Having no choice but to work together, they would take on the monster, and on the brink of defeat, Dark Grepher would sacrifice himself to slay the beast, and ultimately save Dai Grepher, but his sword would be beyond repair. This would lead Grepher back to the Chamber of Weapons, where he would pick up the wicked breaking flamberge. The guardian of this weapon, Guardian Bao, was much less willing to let Grepher take his weapon, so he would attack. Grepher's sword would give out and break during the fight, so left with no choice, he took the sword being guarded by Bao and proceeded to use the last of his might to defeat him with it. This would have devastating consequences for Grepher. The sword Grepher took was actually a part of the fiend's body. The darkness would slowly consume Grepher. Unable to fight it off and resist, the darkness from the sword would continue to consume Grepher, turning him almost unrecognizable from his former self. And he would now be known as Dark Lucius. Dark Lucius would travel through dimensions to try to find his old foe, the reason he became like this in the first place, and also coming across a very familiar, much more noble face in the process. But he was no match for her, and she would send him right back through the portal he came through. Filled with rage at being unable to defeat his enemy, the darkness in the sword would consume him more and more, turning him into the ultimate evil life form. Very special thank you to my patrons like TWR Gaming and Paul for supporting me over on Patreon. Go check it out if you feel like it. If not, thank you so much anyways for watching and making it this far in the video. And that's the lore of how